Merci de vous joindre à nous ici à la Ritz pour la projection de One.Two.Three ce soir. Hi, thank you for joining us here at the Ritz for the projection of One.Two.Three tonight. I'm Robin Simpson, coordinator of public programs and education at the Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery at Concordia University. And a little note that conversations tonight are principally going to be happening in English, but it is a multilingual, bilingual environment. So as it progresses, and then later at the end, when we open up questions, feel free to ask questions or make comments in whatever language you feel comfortable. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're living and acting here on the traditional and unceded territory of the Ganyang-Gehaga. And then quickly a few thank yous to CKUT 90.3 FM, who co-presented this event with us this evening, to Hugues Dugas, our technical coordinator at the Ellen Gallery, and to all the staff at the Ellen Gallery, to Mark at the bar, tip him, to Alex Moscas, who is the voice of our radio spot, and then to our invited speakers, Pierre, Tom, and Bob, as well as Vincent Meessen. So this evening is happening in part because Vincent is here in Montreal conducting research towards his exhibition Ultramarine, which will be presented at the Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery at Concordia in the fall of 2018. And then just a quick summary of the evening tonight. We're going to open with Pierre Kwenders, who we invited to receive, listen to, and respond to One.Two.Three. If, as the narrator in Vincent's video suggests, history is a question of tuning and transmission, a question of listening for the echoes of new conversations, the question posed to Pierre as a musician and performer in dialogue with a long history of Congolese rumba was simply, what do you hear? Immediately following is a screening of the video itself, which runs for 35 minutes. So in some sense, One.Two.Three and this whole event situates the video and all the voices heard within it, not as the start of a conversation, but part of and in the midst of a conversation. And you'll hear lines in the film, the narrator speaking to a sense of echoing. So in this sense, starting with Pierre is also a way of sort of commencing with an echo or reception of an echo, or placing that video in a sort of resonant chamber. And then after the screening, Vincent will join Tom McDonough on stage for a 30-minute exchange, 30-odd minutes or so, following which Pierre and Bob White will join them for a final conversation. Then we can open the floor to questions. Bios for the speakers can be found in the printed program, which is at the front. And thank you, and bon visionnement.
Bonsoir. Good evening. Mon nom est Pierre Kwenders. Je suis auteur-compositeur canadien d'origine congolaise. My name is Pierre Kwenders, and I'm a singer-songwriter originally from Congo, and I've been living here since 2001. I will be doing this speech, this introduction in French, so hopefully everybody here speaks French and can understand. Is that okay with you? Okay, thank you. Donc, d'abord, j'aimerais remercier l'Université Concordia ainsi que la Galerie Léonard et Bina Hélène de m'avoir invité à présenter ce film. C'est un honneur pour moi d'être ici parmi vous ce soir, et je me tiens ici devant vous vraiment comme un jeune Congolais fier de pouvoir revivre une partie de l'histoire de mon pays avec vous. J'ai eu l'occasion, moi, de voir ce film il y a quelques semaines, et j'ai été complètement ému et ébloui par ce film. En tant qu'artiste, j'ai tout de suite voulu faire un peu un parallèle entre les circonstances de l'époque et la réalité que je vis aujourd'hui, ou la réalité que nous vivons tous aujourd'hui. Et je me suis quand même un peu juste un tout petit peu, peut-être reconnu dans l'artiste qu'a été Joseph Mbelolo. Donc, la musique peut souvent être utilisée comme une arme contre la tristesse, la solitude, la peur, mais surtout une arme pour défendre les droits humains. Et elle peut aussi nous aider en tant qu'artistes à choisir et mener plusieurs combats. Elle nous pousse souvent à l'introspection, à chercher toujours plus d'authenticité et de profondeur dans nos engagements humains et sociétaux. Donc il s'agit d'un travail intérieur perpétuel qui alimente le processus créatif autant qu'il s'en nourrit. La chanson dont il est question de M. Joseph Mbelolo dans le film que vous allez voir, selon moi, rejoint un peu cette idéologie-là, celle de vouloir surtout sortir de la conformité, d'être un peu plus engagé et plus authentique. Donc en elle seule, elle représente vraiment en fait un cri, une sorte de révolte contre le système en place. Pour vous mettre en contexte, on est en 68 au Congo, quelques années seulement après l'indépendance du pays et l'arrivée du président Mobutu. Donc on a le départ des colons belges il y a quelques années et l'arrivée d'un nouveau président Mobutu qui veut lui imposer sa vision des choses, sa façon de faire les choses, qui est un peu une sorte de colonisation d'esprit. Donc il faut réagir. Et avec cette chanson, on entend cette envie forte de liberté, de vouloir s'exprimer d'une autre manière à une époque où la rumba congolaise se veut un peu plus conservatrice et cette chanson-là veut justement défier ce côté-là de la musique. Elle est chantée en Kinkongo pendant que le lingala est la langue dominante dans la musique à ce moment-là. Je salue donc cette démarche qui porte en elle la volonté surtout de l'autodétermination et de l'indépendance d'esprit et une véritable quête choisie ici de vouloir vraiment avoir quelque chose d'authentique et qui représente vraiment la vraie réalité de la vie à Kinshasa à ce moment-là. Donc comme un peu Mbelolo, moi qui a choisi au fait d'écrire cette chanson-là en Kinkongo, contrairement à tous les autres musiciens de l'époque qui écrivaient majoritairement en lingala, je me suis un peu reconnu en lui, moi étant un artiste étranger vivant dans un pays à deux langues officielles, le français et l'anglais, et moi qui décide de chanter en plusieurs autres langues, en 5 langues au total, incluant le français et l'anglais. Donc j'ai fait un parallèle avec lui, donc c'est un peu dans ce sens-là que je me voyais avec cet artiste-là. Mais au-delà du chant et du choix de la langue, vous allez constater, comme moi, une place importante qui est donnée dans ce film à la femme. Donc j'aimerais pour cela saluer M. Meessen pour le choix de l'orchestre dans la reproduction de la chanson, qui est un orchestre composé uniquement des femmes, des musiciens extraordinaires. Donc M. Mbelolo et M. Meessen ont choisi un groupe de musiciens justement pour mettre de l'avant la rumba congolaise, qui est une musique traditionnellement dominée par les hommes, aujourd'hui encore. À travers ma musique, j'essaie un peu aussi de faire la même chose, d'essayer de promouvoir et de parler de plus en plus de la femme africaine, de l'importance qu'elle a sur les hommes africains et les jeunes africains comme moi. Mon dernier album que j'ai dédié, qui s'intitule Makanda, qui veut dire force, que j'ai dédié à cette force-là qui m'habite et qui m'a été inculquée par 3 femmes extraordinaires dans ma vie, qui sont ma mère, ma tante et ma grand-mère. Donc, très important de parler des femmes et on remarque souvent que l'opinion des femmes est rarement prise en considération face aux grands enjeux historiques et la subtilité de la présence des femmes dans ce film fait réfléchir. Donc il faudra faire en sorte qu'il y ait une place moins négligée de la femme en Afrique autant qu'ailleurs. Donc je ne vais pas vous saouler avec mes belles paroles. Je vous propose donc de regarder le film et d'en retirer plus qu'une connaissance historique sur la rumba congolaise. Je vous invite tous à en avoir une lecture un peu plus profonde, car la musique elle-même, elle nous appelle à la réflexion et son contexte également. Donc gardez l'œil, vos oreilles et votre pensée grand ouvert et laissez-vous bercer par la musique et cette guitare de la rumba congolaise. Bon visionnement à tous.
Maybe it's a good time to begin, and I suppose, like Pierre, I should really start by thanking our hosts at the Ellen Gallery at Concordia, but also here at the Ritz Bar, which is a very sympathique setting for the screening this evening. Vincent, I mean, this is like a real particular pleasure for me, I have to say, to be up here with Vincent. I guess I would think of it as kind of the continuation of a long-delayed conversation dating back 2 years now, really. So it's nice to finally be sitting here across from him with you this evening. And he asked if I might provide like the really super abbreviated like footnote. I mean, this is the problem with being an academic, is that you get asked to do these things, you know, you're like, well, Michelangelo was born in Brescia in 19, yeah, I mean, so like, what is so, you know, I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with the broad background of the history being recounted in the film, and the history of the Situationist International. But for those who might not be entirely familiar with it, let's just say that the Situationists could be said to represent one of the last great revolutionary artistic / political avant-gardes of the 20th century, the inheritors artistically of that, you know, wave of activity in the years after the First World War in Dada and Surrealism, but also attempting to merge that history of cultural radicalism with the unfinished legacies of revolutionary militancy, all the hopes strangled by the bureaucratic detours of the so-called workers' states of Eastern Europe, an attempt to make good on the promises of Western Marxism. And an international movement, but whose two great or best known progenitors are Western Europeans, the French filmmaker and writer, Doctor of Nothing, Guy Debord, author of The Society of the Spectacle, published in late 1967, at the same time as the Belgian Raoul van Eyck publishes his major tome of situationist thinking, translated into English as The Revolution of Everyday Life, but more dynamically titled in French, it's the Traité du savoir-vivre à l'usage des jeunes générations, kind of mocking 18th century kind of title. A group whose apogee was really reached, let's say, whose promise was made good in the heady days of the May-June uprisings. That's my shtick. And maybe that's a jumping off point, really, to return to the specificity of this amazing film, and to see whether, like, a starting place for us tonight might be, Vincent, if you might talk a bit about the genesis, because it, you know, has this punctual origin in your quasi-academic, if I dare say so, obsession with archives, and your working with the archives of Raoul van Eyck, still living in Belgium, and discovering, I assume, a scrap of paper.
Yes, so thank you for being here, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for making the trip from New York to be here tonight. Really appreciate this. to answer the first question, I think basically it's not such a discovery. It's basically the story goes that the director of a collection of an art center in Belgium is quite close to Raoul and buys some pieces of some stuff, some archive, and he calls me and says, at some point you should come because there's some stuff here with Congo situationism, and it's just like, what the hell? But then, just after thinking briefly, I thought, but that must be the guy who's represented. There's a picture so the Situationist International had a kind of it's not a magazine, but it's how do you call it in English? You would say a journal. That they publish, and they start in 57, I think, with that. And at some point in one important actually text, which is called Les mots captifs, which is a way to rethink about rhetoric and how words are used. There is this very small picture of a black guy who's attending the Congress in Paris in '66. And I thought that must be this one. So I thought, I was always intrigued by this presence at one of their meetings, like regular Congress. And that was a starting point for the project. Basically, what was in the archive were two texts. One was this text that was used for the piece here, and another one was a translation of a song by Franco Luambo, which is an ode to Patrice Lumumba, who had been killed and murdered basically by the Belgian and the CIA. And Franco had written a song about that, which was a rumba. And Mbelolo, Joseph Mbelolo, makes a translation for his friends, Situationist, from Lingala to French. And then in the archive there's this other text which is signed by himself, and it actually connects with the events of '68, which was, and in the archive was actually the Kinkongo version, but also the French version. So immediately I could see how interesting it was, because you have to know that not only like the history of the Situationist National is a very complex and very long story, because they were basically an international, so they had sections in different countries. There was even a try for a section in Canada, which didn't really succeed, but it was planned for several months, and this is something I'm working on for the show I'm preparing in Concordia. But this connection with Congo was totally unknown, so I thought this is really interesting, because I was thinking of writing a project for the Venice Biennale because there was a call, and I thought, this is interesting. We could think about Venice also as the last city that hosted Congress from the Situationist International, and after that the movement dissolved. And then thinking about this connection between Brussels, Kinshasa, and Venice, and trying to work in that within that triangle, and then basically I thought that it could only be interesting to make such a work if I would invite some other people and rethink a little bit, like just with this kind of distance, not straight, but think about this notion of internationalism and what it means today after 89. So that was a little bit the trajectory of the project. But so it's not so much that I was like looking into the archive of Raoul, and I have to. I was basically called by someone who thought, okay, this might be interesting, and then I started to research, and it's always a long process, as I've just started here and to some archive also. there I had to find and reconnect with Mbelolo, and he was still living, and so I brought him back his text, and he said, yeah, I wrote this, but I couldn't actually bring anything back when I decided to come back to Congo. This guy lived actually more than 30 years in exile in Belgium and in the States, but most of his time in Belgium, because he was an opponent to Mobutu really early on, and he was never able to go back. So when he went back to Congo, he couldn't take anything with him, any of his writing. So he led everything in Belgium, and then when I went on to research and find back, all the stuff that was supposed to be in a place, it was really weird, because actually the Congolese guy family who was supposed to host had a fire in the house. So they lost everything, but they wouldn't tell him because they so I had to. I was the one who had to tell him, actually all your writings have burned, so it's really a pity, because he wrote a lot of texts. He was really a major opponent. He was writing a lot of and also quite important in distributing pamphlets and students magazines from that period.
Maybe before we get into the specifics of this film, it might be also interesting to hear a little bit about how this connects to a larger body of work for you, in the sense that those of you who have seen some of Vincent's previous films, previous works, would recognize certain continuities, both in, let's say, an interest in reanimating hidden corners of the historical archive, but also a deep interest in what you've called a colonial ontology. The way that these that particular colonial past never remains past, and continues to echo in uncanny ways through the present. And I'm thinking obviously of maybe Vita Nova, a film of 2009 that explored the complex family, let's say the imbrication of Roland Barthes, the great French critic, the imbrication of his family history with the history of French colonialism and its potential curious impacts on his own writing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so the term is not from me. Of course, it's like ontology is a play that Derrida actually brought in playing with ontology, and with this idea that things that are haunting have a sort of presence and they remain. So he would allude this to Marxism and how actually how can you inherit in the present of a theory, or and then I kind of coined these two things, like colonial ontology, and organized a screening program in Paris in 2011, and basically bringing a lot of films that had not been shown in Paris. Paris being a sort of place where they had, and probably it's a little bit different now, had a really big difficulty to tackle also the colonial issues, and in the art field, I mean because probably it has been, of course, something that has been challenged by documentary film for a very long period, but in the art field is really reluctant to deal with these issues. So that was something that took place a few years ago, and I think that had some kind of impact on the scene. Regarding the issue with the Vita Nova, we could maybe look at those two works together as being also a way to think about how we inherit also a critical theory and what we do with it, and of course that's an issue. When you start with a piece like this text of Mbelolo, which has been written in 68, right during the events, what does it mean today? Probably nothing in Kinshasa. So you have to find also a way to actualize it and think about it in the present. And I think that's basically what I try to do when I try to somehow pay tribute. It's kind of tribute to a thinking, to a methodology. At the same time, it's trying to look, also using that methodology into the blind spots, or trying to think about what I decide to inherit, what I try to recapture from that. That is very important, and I think that's part of the task. Is also like not just it's not just actualizing. I think it's trying to make something out of it that is valid, that is operative in the present. For this work, I think that we have the same issue, that is basically that the Situationist had a very radical project that was probably phrased in a way that remains so radical that and also so reluctant to being part of an art scene, that it remains something that is alluded in talks, in ways of behaving by artists, but that is never really challenged into the. So it remains a very complicated issue for, I think, all artists, and it's also very important because basically I think it's not possible to be an artist today if you don't challenge this, if you don't go through this, if you don't think about it. So I think it remains a very difficult issue to work with, like taking really seriously these writings and seeing also where there is some kind of blindness, and maybe I would like to hear you about it, because I think it's we can read, we can try to recapture also a lot of historical facts about what happened and how they behave and how they challenge that, but still I would be interested to know how you, maybe it's very general, but how you because it's very complex also, it's very there is a lot of different sections, different.
No, but I think, and I'm not sure whether you can correct me if I'm not really responding to your question, but it seems to me that there's almost like two different Situationist internationals, right? There's the Situationist international we can know from reading, reading the journal, reading the Society of the Spectacle, and that's the one we're comfortable with. And especially someone like myself, right? Who spends a lot of time in libraries and around books, and I can trace the détournement of Marx and Hegel and Pannekoek and whatever. You can just dig down into that archive as deep as you want and lose yourself in texts. And that's one Situationist international. But there is this other one that is like harder and more elusive, I think, for us to find, but that I've become more and more interested in over the years. And it's the one that never, or very seldom, gets reflected in writing. And you just catch glimpses of it, like in the photographs, Vincent, that you were talking about at the beginning, where you get reproduced in the journal these images of the group leading their lives, maybe at a conference discussing, maybe just at a bar, And it's that notion that this was not simply, aesthetico-political avant-garde, inheritors of Dada and Surrealism. This was like a group of people who were deeply affectively bound up with one another. There was a kind of intense emotional attachment, a kind of love, like a bonds of love, right? And we're much more comfortable talking about like, oh, so-and-so got kicked out and, De Boer was such an asshole and all that kind of thing. But, I think there's this other side, which is that there's this profound emotional commitment between them. And that, and in some ways, all the theorizing was ways of getting at how do you create and preserve those bonds? What might that mean? And the group was trying to live it at a micro level all the time.
It's really funny because at this moment I'm researching the work of a pre-situationist, if we could say, Patrick Straham, who was a very important player here in Montreal. He arrived in Canada in '54, leaving Paris, and just before this group of Situationist International was created in '57, basically. But before that, there was a whole group of people who were thinking, meeting, drinking, smoking, and preparing this other story, and they were called the International Lettristes, also founded by some 3 or 4 people, among which Guy Debord. And one of the very important player in that story is Patrick Straham, who later became this kind of plaque tournante here and pivotal character within the cultural scene and artistic scene in Montreal. He would speak about amour camaraderie, which is in French, of course, is really really thinking and talking about this relationship between the members. And it's true that in the mid '50s, when they would be in the Saint-Germain neighborhood, they would be, in some bars and meet each other and spend hours of talking. And I think this relationship and these all these exchanges that don't appear, of course, in these journals that are, nights in bars and outside bars, were key into the development of their politics, also in their way of being together. And I think the film, there's an issue, if I can just come back to the film about that. I think, I'm not going to analyze the film for you, but of course you see the final sequence and the whole film is are quite different. The whole film is more about, this question, how do we come together? Musicians, if they play together, they have to find each other. They have to get tuned one to another, and basically that was the idea for the work. So here it's on the screen. It's really small because we have like 3 different images. When I was projecting, I just show this image because actually what you see is a version that was made for movie theaters, but the work, although it was not shown like this in Venice, it's now shown like this. So it's like very big screens, a cinematic installation with 3 different screens, right? So it's very different as a work. But basically, so then if you see it big like that, you can see that these women, these musicians, they have actually earplugs. And the idea of the work was basically that they would be in this building, which was built by Franco Luambo, which is a little bit, it's a sort of mythic club in Kinshasa, and they would try to get the tune one to another. So they had like transmitter, and that's how the whole film was done. So they tried to play together. This is one thing. And then at the end we have like this solo with this Ndara music instrument, which is plugged and electrified now, which is basically the very instrument for which the song was written. So Mbelolo wrote a song for this instrument. It was not a rumba. But for a very long time I thought it was a rumba. So I kind of worked on this idea, and then at some point we had to find a solution. So maybe with Bob we will speak a little bit about the musical choice later on and why.
But can I maybe ask a little bit? One of the things that really struck me watching the film tonight was how much the building is a character in the film. How absolutely central it is, and it's a strange thing, I guess, maybe because on the one hand, it's labyrinthine in the most positive way, a building that refuses to be understood in a glance. You could say the opposite of the Martyrs Stadium across the road, right? The stadium in which you're meant to be able to encompass the entire structure with one sweep of the eye around the field. Here sightlines are continually broken, corridors lead to strange places. It's it's your dream club in a way, right? Like you really want to party there. so there's that, but then there's also another side to it, which is its separation from the street. I mean, in a way, the condition of that labyrinth is the continual blockage of access to the larger world. I mean, it's to bring in like a umpteenth French thinker, like we could call it like heterotopic, in the Foucauldian sense, maybe. Oh God, you see, I really am like take me out of the class, you can bring me to a bar, but I'm still going to be a professor. Sucks. But no, so I'm curious about working with the building, and then the building becomes a kind of, Robin, at the beginning you were talking about a resonant space. I mean, the building is, the building is an instrument as well, right? I mean, percussive. It's percussed by the drummer.
Yeah, the building. Franco is not there anymore. So his son is basically trying to hold something about that heritage, and this band, the OK Jazz, was one of the two most important band in Congolese music in the 60s. So it's a very, very important piece of heritage that has influenced the whole music that came after. Franco was a very important player also politically, because he was at some point close to Mobutu, which makes something maybe we will also discuss, this kind of art and political relationship, where the artist, what kind of role does he play, And for me, it was also very interesting to do this work within this mandate of making a pavilion and being somehow a sort of diplomatic agent for a country, which is always a very touchy issue as an artist. So when I came there for the first time, I was completely taken by this building, and I knew that he had been involved in reshaping the building. And I thought that's amazing, like a musician who becomes an architect and somehow, challenges and decide that this wall should be there. So it was a labyrinth, because I haven't seen everything, basically, but it's not that big, it's not that big. But I thought, okay, that's gonna be the space. There was also a musical studio where we could record Joseph, so this was the perfect setting. Then I went there and worked a lot with these musicians in order to, get this work ready. But then when I come with the crew for the recording, that's why also the dates are mentioned. It's a very particular week where riots took place and a lot of killing also. We were there in the club, right in the middle of the confrontation between the opposition party and activists, I would say, and the parliamentary who were trying to get a new law voted that would allow Kabila to make a third mandate. So we were blocked actually in the club for several days, and that's why also it changed the whole idea of the film somehow, because normally it's like you have people everywhere. It would have been really hard to film within the space. So for me, it was really important that Franco would be part of that story, because not only because the club is medic, but he's not there anymore. The architecture is there, and then it becomes a sort of haunting presence of Franco also. Franco was a very dubious, very ambivalent artist who would, take money from Mobutu, would even sing for him, but would always also be on the side of the people, a resistance.
Like Elvis.
Yeah, you could compare, but he's not only a star in Congo. It's very strange, because if you speak about Franco in Belgium, where Franco used to live at the end of his life, had also a group there for the Congolese community, and would tour also in Europe. So he had one band in Congo and one band in Belgium at the end of his life. He was, and he's still a major star in many, many African countries. And this is actually connected with the power of the transmitter that the Belgians put during World War II, where actually the song of Franco were going on air and would, arrive until Nigeria or even South Africa. And that's why the Congolese rumba, and particularly his songs, are known, by taximen even today in Kenya or Nigeria. So that's also very interesting to see how a technique, has pushed this kind of sound very, very far away.
Sure. I mean, I'm gonna. I think Bob can explore these questions with you much better than I could. And so maybe
maybe I'm showing a few things where you could connect to the
Sure,
show you haven't seen, but
no, indeed. But I want to, one of the things, in preparing for tonight, I was kind of rereading writings about Vincent's work, and he's had the good fortune to have some really brilliant scholars write for him. But because the films are so complex in terms of content, I feel like often essays spend their time working through the complicated content of the work, and how the work is constructed formally can disappear from those discussions. And I think one of the things that really is striking for me when I look at this work is how complex the formal construction is, and that we shouldn't. And that's part of the politics of the work as well. And so I'm curious, maybe like a place before we open this up to a broader discussion, it would be to ask you about formal elements. So I might say, like, on one hand, I'm really curious, like, let's leave Guy Debord aside for a moment. I can't believe I'm saying that. My book's for sale in the back of the room, folks. Like, leaving Debord aside for the moment, what about Godard? Jean-Luc Godard, who seems really central in this story, and in fact, in the Venice installation, the space was really set up in a way that echoed this London recording studio setting in 1+1, otherwise known as Sympathy for the Devil, the film that Godard makes in part filming with the Rolling Stones in London in the summer of '68. So Godard,
and with the Black Panthers,
in London, indeed. So like Godard on one hand, and I wanted to ask about the mirrors. Like, you need to tell me more about the mirrors, because they're, they play a crucial role in at least a part of the film, and there's even credit at the end for the designer of the mirrors, and so I'm really curious about what they're doing as well.
It's actually very connected to how we circulate within the building. The moment I discovered the building, I understand immediately that it's interesting, not only because of its history, but because of its physicality, and because of its ontology, we could say, also, like the presence of Franco. But I had to challenge something, which is basically the fact that the musician, I could imagine them, performing, even like this idea of performing the building, but it's not so huge. So I had to also think about how I would, use it, and this idea that they have to get attuned one to another, so they have to be in movement. Then
so it's almost like a Robert Smithson, like Mirror Travels. The club becomes the Hotel Palenque that he maps in his travels to Mexico.
Well, I wouldn't say that this reference was there, but there is something like that. It's basically how I could use the building to make a dérive inside, like to organize some kind of dérive for the musician, like cinematically, This is one thing, but then I remember, this designer, the Jan Steveling, Belgian designer, who has been and is still working on a new creation that is basically twisting what a mirror is, and she's basically, I don't know how to say in English. En français, on travaille sur le biseau, sur les arêtes des miroirs, et elle recolle, en fait, elle travaille à recoller, à créer des perspectives à partir des miroirs en biseautant les côtés. So these create actually some kind of mirror where you look at yourself but you're divided, like you split into the mirror. So it's really not only very interesting what happens, but also so it's really bright as a sort of. And now she's working on new pieces. And I thought, would you allow us to use this for cinema? And so I contacted her, and she had basically some prototypes, and we had them cut, and we made some. Yeah, we tried over there in Congo with them. It was just crazy because all what you see here, there's not a single effect. In the credits it says like digital effects, but it's not about this. It's just about bringing this sequence from the films that were done by militants in the streets. So all the sequence where you have like these, image completely.
Those are filmed in the mirrors.
Yeah, it's just by using Diane's mirror in front of the camera and making some movement. So this create really like this kind of twist that I really wanted also, like not being, in a way realist, I would say, about the environment, but like really trying to bring some kind of formal element that would challenge the whole way we look at the building, but also I think it reproduces also somehow kind of atmosphere when you are like in the bar, like you have more than a couple of beers and that's it actually, that's kind of and I'm really glad that actually it's completely mechanical, it's completely produced by this thing, but there's no effect. Then maybe I could just jump to the other content when I was speaking about digital effects is just about like reordering and formatting some images from the riots, and that choice was actually guided not really by Godard, but more by Chris Marker, who is also credited in the end, because he made a film which is called Le Fond de l'air est rouge, I think, after May '68, by collecting images of militants that had been shot in the street and like editing this, and then he revisits the locations after the events, and it shows how normality comes back, and I really like this idea also of like collecting images from people and then bringing them together in a film. And the only thing I could do, because for us it was way too dangerous just to go outside when the military were shooting, I just have to say that internet was closed, emails were closed. It was the first time in Congo that the situation was so dramatic. So after some weeks, some people started to post things on the internet, and I kind of recapture from all these things, but only the people who filmed right next to us. So there was a whole search about finding, back like the stadium and all these things. And then to answer the question about Godard, of course, is more into the installation, and it's always quitting here. And we can see here like the sonic modules that are alluding effectively to the shooting of 1+1. That was a major, of course, influence for doing this film. I think it's just a brilliant film where the Stones are recording an album while the Black Panthers are invited to read their prose, or not only there, but also some books by Leroy Jones. Yeah.
But maybe that's a good segue into continuing the conversation with more folks.
I just collected a few. I just took a few images from the research I'm doing here. So it's just between us. It's 70 July, it seems. Jean-Luc Godard is on the right. In the sofa, you have Patrick Staram, and the other people I don't know. This is Godard in Montreal. It was probably, I'm not so sure about it, not 100% sure, but I think he was invited by Patrick Staram. He was touring also the States at that moment, had different screening like programs of all his films in Berkeley in California.
Do you have that picture with Mbelolo?
Yeah, we want to see that.
I want to see that picture with Mbelolo. The Mbelolo picture that you found
From the archive.
in your archives at the Raoul's place. You said you found the picture with the black dude.
No. In Raoul's archive were actually only texts, and the problem was basically that when I met him the first time, I could have shown like the moment I met him for the first time, it was interesting in his university because he's a rector, he's like a head of a university, Bello, in a small university, a Protestant university in Kinshasa. Yeah. So. In the song, there is also like, actually, it's only translated in English, so there's a kind of filter because the lyrics are really violent, of course. Is really violent. So that was maybe the good thing for me that the minister, when she visited the pavilion, and she couldn't really like understand how, because the last sentence is really really violent also.
Well, and in good situationist. I mean, tradition, certainly, whether that's something that's, that's one of the real legacies, of the SI, that rhetorical violence.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be the moderator, so I'll try to moderate. This is not easy to moderate because of the film and the people around the table. With regards to that comment about violence, as someone who's worked on Congolese music, I found the lyrics to be extremely violent, and yet I know that they were translated, so the violence was kind of filtered, as you said. I want to ask a question about that later, but I want to start with Pierre and see because we were kind of going back and forth at the bar, kind of talking about Kinshasa and the film itself and the music, because you're a musician, and just wanted to know if either in the film or in the conversation that we just witnessed, what are you thinking about? What is this? Qu'est-ce que ça provoque? C'est sans faire. Je voulais pas mettre la pression intello parce qu'on disait que vous êtes vraiment
très intello. You
très
guys were very
le
smart with your
merci, c'était beau,
conversation.
What are you thinking about?
I'm definitely not. I didn't do the study that he did or your research and stuff, but the thing that I found really interesting is to find this kind of it's really rare in Congolese music to have this kind of statement in music. Most of the time we usually try to say things, but we don't really say it loud enough for people to understand and do something about it. And like you said, Franco used to sing as much as for Mobutu and be also the voice for the people, but he was more of a Mobutu singer than he was a people person. Well, it depends on the period. Yeah.
I think I agree with Pierre.
I have to say something about this, and maybe we can, because we will just speak a little bit about music. So I just try to put all the layers. Sometimes might seem some details, but as we enter the musical part, it's important. So imagine I meet Mbelolo in Kinshasa, and he's like, saying, this is something I wrote. That's true, but I don't remember the music. So the music. Yes. So it's only very late that actually told me that it was written for the ndara, this instrument that we see in the end. So even after, I was like, trying to think how I need to, find some music. So I made some research, and at some point, I found out this song that was not written. It was a cover, also, and I found it interesting that Franco did of a traditional song in Kinkongo, because he was raised in this language, Kinkongo language. Yeah, and this song is Luvumbundoki. What is the song? It's a song in Kinkongo when we arrived in a concert scene in the film, we're actually into that song. So we are flipping from the Mbelolo song Situation to Franco. And what do we see? So they allude, like witch and sorcerer and so. The song is about a chief of a village that decides to, if you want to, how do you say it, to sacrifice some people from the village in order to stay in power, right? So il mange les siens, as they say in French. Yeah. And when it was released as a record, it was immediately censored by Mobutu because we're in '66, and because he thought that it was actually a critique towards him, right? So the Secret Service went into the shops and they took the records. So we have a choice that is made also because this is exactly the same period when it was written by Mbelolo, more or less. It's a Kinkongo song, and it's a song that was censored. So this is how
censorship is not exceptional at any period in the Congo, including the Belgian period or even now. It's the norm, right? So the idea of writing a song about witchcraft or a sorcerer is double message, because the sorcerer is the virtuoso, right? When Franco was known as le sorcier de la guitare, right? He was the virtuoso guitar soloist, but the sorcier is also the person that sacrifices his people for power. So of course it was a critique of power, but at the same time, Franco was sacrificing people symbolically to stay in power. So yeah, he wrote that song and it was censored, but Franco was also the one who people say had, a special chair in Mobutu's office.
That's later. Right? That's later.
Of course. Of course. But
because you have to know that that's what just important. The stadium that we see, because a lot of things that you see in the films that can only be understood by people from Kinshasa also. And in all my works there is something like that. The stadium you see, the Stadium des Martyrs, is basically carrying his name after the coup de force of Mobutu in '66, when he's actually hanging 3 politicians by saying they were plotting against me for, a coup. And that's the moment where everywhere, in Congo of course, but also like the Belgians, they don't believe what's happening. And so when you see interview from that period, it's really amazing. Like he made this kind of coup, by killing and hanging these people in public. And the Stade des Martyrs is referring to that crime, actually, to that state crime.
But I think something that's interesting about this discussion that I'd want to press you on a little bit. I mean, even if Franco's song is censored, as you said, it's speaking a double language. The Mbelolo song isn't speaking a double language. It's, as you said, it's incredibly direct. And but we can think about what's the structural condition of that directness. The fact that it was written in Belgium and not in the Congo. And in a way, it's a song that had no future. I mean, it had no history. It was written and lost immediately because it was structurally impossible for this song to be heard by the audience that it was actually intended for. And that becomes something, that really becomes a complex question then. I think in the way, so much of this film is an excavation of a past that we still want to romanticize. Let's face it, 68 is still it's going to be a good year next year. Let me tell you, I'm going to be giving talks everywhere, right? Yeah, well, sure. But beneath that, there's a more difficult history that you're digging out here. A history of a song that couldn't be heard. And and as you say, even now, in a way.
No, even now, I cannot play the film, but for again, it's like there's these inserts, of riots that are actually opponent to Kabila, but there's also these 2 or 3 lines, which is actually a motto in Lingala that says "kick him out." That was actually the phrase that was repeated and repeated in all the demonstrations. So only by that it makes this work impossible to be screened today in Congo.
I'm kind of interested in your kind of attachment to Franco. As a foreigner working in the Congo and being interested in the history of music, I became attached to Franco really quickly. But constantly over the time that I spent in Kinshasa, people kind of pushed back. And they said, well, yeah, but Franco, you know, kind of like you were saying, like, you know, but Franco, you know, he became a lackey, but maybe he was always a lackey. And there's always this tension around Franco. And they would almost always say that Franco wasn't the voice of opposition. The voice of opposition was this other school of music. There are these two kind of like basic aesthetic schools in Congolese popular dance music, and they're both rumba. One is kind of traditionalist, and one is kind of modernist. And Franco was the traditionalist school, so he would sing about, you know, in Kinkongo and have a different music style with a different type of dancing. And then the modernist tradition, which was referred to as fiesta, it's kind of like this, you might have heard of Papa Wemba and Zyko, and this is like...
Yeah, but they come much later, right?
Exactly. So there were these kind of two competing orchestras, and people tend to say that if there was any real political opposition, it came from the other school, the fiesta school, and not from Franco's school. So I'm not saying who was like more politically correct.
No, but Franco started in, you know, in 55, 56. He was at 15 he was known in all Kinshasa, you know. Yeah. At 19 he was a star, and this is much before, you know. All these people you mentioned, they come much later.
No, it was 51. 51 was Grand Calais, and Grand Calais was associated with the other school. Yeah. So, but we're having this little internal debate. I'm not saying I know. Yeah, totally right. I'm not saying that Franco. I agree with what you said. Franco is the most ambivalent character in the history of the music, but also of the politics. So, but my question for you is not, you know, why did you choose Franco? Because I'm a Franco freak also. But what does Franco represent for you? And why do you think when we come in as critical thinkers or as lefties from the North, why are we interested in Franco? Because when you talk to people in Kinshasa, it happened to me 100 times. If it happened to me once, they said, yeah, Franco, okay, but my real artist, it was, you know, Taboulet, or my real artist, it was Grand Calais. Well, and they have this, and it happened to me 100 times.
Taboulet also was kind of, you know, in the same, with Franco and Mobutu and stuff. Grand Calais was more, you know, it was the biggest guy, you know. But I think Taboulet was also like a member of, you know, the entourage of the president, you know.
Well, what was very interesting, if we can just, you know, because we can mention people, but it's really hard for the public probably to spot. I think what is interesting is to understand that you cannot become an important politician in Congo, even today, if you don't deal with musicians. So the musicians, they have a very important political role. Even today, like, it's amazing. There was actually in 2015, when I was in the Venice Biennale, there was this work by Carsten Holler, who was really interesting because he's a German artist who's been a complete fan of rumba for, you know, is a very connoisseur. I mean, much more than me, and he made this work about this kind of challenge, une joute entre two very important musicians from Congo who are playing in two different stadiums, and the challenge is that the one who will keep his fan the longer will win. And but you speak about tens of thousands of people
full
in stadium, you know, like for a whole night long.
Did he do the stadium performance?
I think it's only this challenge, this kind of joute only takes place, you know, very rarely. It's just like sort of
it's a real joute that they do, but he had an installation which was involving two stadiums.
Yeah,
it never happened.
Yeah, maybe it's possible. I don't know the whole details of the, but it shows also that there is a direct connection also to politicians and to their power actually in Congo. So what I mean is also that Franco is very interesting because of being ambivalent. I think he has a whole story before connecting to Mobutu, you know, but he's, as you say, more into the tradition, more into the social critique, while what you call the modern tradition is much more into, like, you know,
cosmopolitanism.
We would say like the soul, the, you know, the kind of much more, probably you could say modern, but where the critique is nearly absent. While in Franco you have always this kind of double reading that is possible.
So do you think of that kind of modernist impulse, a kind of the cosmopolitanism of African of the modernist school? Is that more radical somehow than a traditionalism? In the West we tend to think of traditionalism as conservative and as being reinforcing the powers that be, but in some sense, if what you're saying, to follow your line of thinking, Franco certainly had a traditionalist tendency in his music, and that's why his music didn't really have a lot of, he didn't produce any offspring, any musical offspring directly like the other groups did. So is his traditionalism a form of radicalism, or is it that you can only really be radical if you're modern? Because there's this modernist thing in Belo's discourse, you know what I mean? It's a kind of a forward-looking progressivism. We're going to kind of, it's
Well,
the Protestantism. It's weird, like Protestantism.
At the same time, musically, it's even much more traditional than of course, because
true,
in
because
Dara,
of the instruments,
the Daran thing is really like something for you to, for if you walk from one city to another, to keep like. So it's sort of work song, So it's even more traditional.
So the categories kind of break down. Western
I don't
categories break
really
down.
think in terms of this kind of duality. I don't think it's really operative, I would say.
Come again?
A question about
tradition and
Yeah.
the relationship to traditional music and modern music and kind of conservatism and
through
radicalism.
the years that I don't really. Oh, sorry. I don't really think that tradition means being like. How do you say it?
Conservative.
Well, it's not being conservative in Africa. It's I believe there was a point in Congolese history musically. I'm saying there was a point where we didn't really use traditional sound in Congolese rumba, and I think that came about right around the same time, in the 60s and early 70s.
That's good.
And people were trying to integrate more of the traditional sounds in the music, and you had people also from other provinces trying to sing more and more in their languages.
This is a part of the political history, because Mobutu, his politics is a politics of authenticity.
Yeah.
So he comes in and he says, we're going to kick them out. This was something that, I don't know where the expression came from, but this was his political slogan. We're going to kick them out, and we're going to come back to our traditional roots. It's not a return to authenticity, it's a recourse. Donc pas un retour, mais un recours à l'authenticité.
Yeah.
And he makes authenticity public state policy, and he starts getting traditional groups from different regions to perform their traditional dances in the stadium. And so at some level, I mean, of course, Mobutu is like the antithesis of revolution, even though his political party is called the Revolutionary Party, but it's not revolutionary at all, except that one thing you have to remember from the perspective of that historical moment, people really, a lot of people, not everyone, I mean, your network didn't, but a lot of people thought it was a political revolution. I have colleagues who worked in the Congo in that period, and they said they were writing texts about authenticity as a real revolution.
I believe he was.
We know what it became.
I believe it was a real revolution, and also he helped Congolese people just to wake up and just be more connected to their roots and get the country unified. I think that helped.
That was
unify
his contribution.
Exactly, that was the contribution. You can say whatever you want to say about Mobutu, but that authenticity idea was one of his greatest idea ever.
I think there's a sort of agreement on that of course he used it as a political agenda somehow to recapture something, but basically it was very positive for a lot of people to be exposed and to be able to for these sounds and these dance to be performed before wide audience. So I think there is a very positive dimension to that movement, but of course the problem is also that it was used as a political tool to.
It didn't look revolutionary very long.
No,
the revolution didn't last very long.
it could not be revolutionary. It was artistically, it could be interesting for artists to rediscover some tradition from the village, so that's really what happened, you know. I think that this song, I mean, when Franco is going back to a very traditional song to cover it, it's part of that. Probably it's part of that, but it comes a little bit later, right? Authenticity comes in the 70s. I
have to ask you, because we're on this topic of opposition and political protest, and maybe you can comment on this also about the role of the Situationist movement and its relationship to authority. What's so interesting about Franco is that he had this tortured relationship with authority, and it just got more and more complicated over time. He really, people started to equate him with Mobutu and Mobutuism at the end, but he also remained an artist of the people in many ways. So my question is about this reference to protest, and I was looking in the other direction during this part of the film, but your protagonist, I think he's the protagonist. It might be, the building might be the protagonist, but your protagonist says something about our Protestant tradition in the Kinkongo. So in the western part of Congo, there's Catholicism everywhere, but there's also Protestantism, and the Protestantism is very strong in the western part of the country around Kinshasa, and there's a Kinkongo, there's like a millenarial tradition in the West Congo with these characters that he's mentioned, the Kimbango and these Kipamita, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, and he said this was a part of our Protestant tradition, but it seemed like in the subtitles that you wrote protest and not Protestant. Did I miss the word Protestant?
I always if it's so, it's a mistake. Yeah. No, because it's really Protestant. Yeah.
Well, see, this is something that Catholics tend to forget. Right? Protestantism began as like the first punk, gesture to say no. You could tell us more about this history. I thought it was strange that he was referencing.
That is a mistake. I haven't seen it.
Well, I was interested in what he was trying to say. He was kind of saying we have this religious tradition, which is not actually African at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there might be something aesthetically African about it, where the relationship to power is kind of, and this is the Situationist movement, is to say we're unraveling this system, right? So was it weird? I mean, did he talk a lot about?
No, for me it was really interesting. That's why I kept it in the final cuts. Is that is actually not? Is like referring to also some opposition, tradition that was existing before, and that he could like reconnect some ideas of what was presented to him. Like imagine this guy is like maybe 22, living in Belgium, studying with Raoul van Eghem, and then being caught into this movement and then traveling to Paris. Imagine. I know that they were connected with also some former minister from the Lubumba government, particularly a guy who was in Paris living after in exile, who would write about sexuality in communities in Congo and about the place of the woman, and they tried to connect. The board tried to connect with all these guys also, and like to learn and to imagine what's going to happen in Congo, because it has to happen there. He understood at least that Congo was really like this kind of hot place where a lot of tension was, and that it was going to play a role as early as the Cold War, the place of Congo.
It was right
Cold
there.
War.
It was between these two cities. The Cold War happened right there.
So Mbelolo is like really conscious about, is making his own link, how what he gets from that and how he connects with his own experience. And the funny thing is that also how today is still using, like having these students read, both Raoul and Debord and Fanon, and that's really what he does. But also he said to me that he's using like some traditional ways of bringing people together, like trying to create some kind of arena and discussing topics within the university and within the community. So it's like reusing and like completely sort of, you know, bridging some kind of tradition that have on the paper nothing to do with one with another, but still is like this kind of syncretism, you know, this kind of complete impossibility to have this kind of song, which, as you said, is completely impossible within the tradition both of rumba and dara. It's like writing such a song is a total it doesn't exist. So what I was interested in is imagine that this had happened, you know, this had happened. It has produced this kind of form, this kind of, you know, text, and this is truly unique. Even today, you cannot find something like that.
Yeah. There is a kind of there's a Kinkongo traditional part. So the Congo region of west of Kinshasa, there's a lot of Kinkongo traditionalism in the film. You know, to choose Franco because he's from that region, and Belolo, I assume he's from the same region. But there are other regions in the country where there are traditions of contestation, and so the other musicians were kind of the other school were kind of focused on Lumumba, which was another, right? I was gonna, and also the mirror, right? The mirror, it's a great question. I agree with you that the mirror is really, formal terms, the mirror is really a strong presence in the film, and it's a creative.
It was also derived from the club, you know. There's one opening shot. So the first time I visited the club, I saw this broken mirror, you know, that was inside, and I thought this is interesting because it was really like an image, you know, like you couldn't look at the club without looking at this broken mirror that was reflecting, creating this kind of, you know, plural image. And I thought this is interesting to use as a formal element in the film. So it comes really from, it's not something I brought like saying, no, it's really...
But did you talk with them about it? Because there in all of these traditional Kinkongo statues, there are these mirrors in the Kinkongo fetish.
No, I think, but I think
there are mirrors and they're really, and it's a Kinkongo thing. They don't have the mirrors.
That's true. Yeah,
to me, I don't know if it just happened that way, but it's in terms of the history of the region and this Kinkongo tradition of, you know, protest and looking at others through the self. It's the mirror is really very appropriate.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I wanted to ask you. We have to wrap up pretty soon, but I wanted to ask you. I want to come back to this question of. I think it might be one of the themes that runs throughout the film and runs throughout Congolese history. It might be something that we'd be able to talk about in terms of a common thread, and it's this very situationist idea of alienation. Seems like a really kind of like, you know, old-fashioned concept now, alienation. But there was a kind of an arc in the movie, especially in the editing, not just the visual, but the sound. The sound was really
very important. Yeah,
very important. That you have these. As viewers, we're trying to figure out how are they actually playing as musicians. How are they actually playing together? Because they're clearly not together physically, and yet so we got all these scenes where there's like maybe two musicians playing together, and then there's maybe three, but it's not clear. How are they actually playing together, right? And then at the end of the film, they're in a concert setting and they're playing together, and it's this weird kind of défoulement. It's kind of like a cathartic, I'm not sure if it's cathartic or if it's revolution or if it's violence or what's going on in the last scene, but there's kind of like a disconnect between the first part of the movie and the second part where the musicians actually are able to play together on the same stage. Is this kind of like a situationist, you know, dénouement, right? Where they're actually able to come together and, you know, like materialize the revolution or something, or because I kept being frustrated as a musician, thinking, okay, can the musicians look at each other for a few minutes while they're playing? But it didn't seem to affect the process because the song kept getting better and better, and then at the end they're together, but they still kind of seem alienated at the end.
Well,
is that a question?
It's very interesting to hear about the reading. Well, before that, you have to recall that this very strange moment where Mbelolo is like in the studio, right? Trying to put his voice. Yeah. But and just to make a jump to this other film that you were mentioning, Vita Nova, I use completely the same process. If you want, I'm interested in of course using documentary style as a sort of protocol, but I'm not interested in like making documentaries or so-called documentaries. Still, what happens there in the studio is that for the first time, Mbelolo has headphones on his ears and he's actually hearing what the women have been working on for months. So he has never heard the song, and immediately it's just like he knows that it's filmed, he has a crew around him, and he tries to sing with it along with them. And so there's nothing that has been asked, you know. So I'm like creating a situation where things might happen, and it happens.
So you did that on purpose, putting him in front of a
Yeah.
mic and having him.
But no, like
put
making him
headphones.
experience the song, how it has
Yeah.
been covered by these
Okay.
women and this producer, with choice we've been making along the way, you know,
He
like
was hearing
for
it for
weeks.
the first time?
But he hears for the first time,
Okay.
you know.
He's clearly discovering the song.
He's discovering the song, and it creates this kind of thing where he has to. Yeah, it's awkward. But you have the song, like, you know, like it's coming, and then we arrive into this concert scene where we just jump into Franco's thing, where the music is actually, you know, the same, but like going back to the traditional song, where, yeah, you could say it's a sort of défoulement. It's the moment where they come together.
Mm.
But as I mentioned, after there's another scene, and I think that is something that is not resolved there that I like to think about. But for me, it's really important to think about the place of the artist also within, you know, within the community, and as someone who is possibly working not at this idea of creating this œuvre, you know, but more like thinking about in terms of désœuvrement, like how the artist is possibly the one that is speaking to the community and saying that this coming together can become also something, you know, poisonous. So you have always this idea that as maybe more into a sort of philosophical
Kind of a
thinking,
critique of conformity.
well, a critique of the myth of community, you would say.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, that kind of final scene playing this traditional instrument. I mean, where, you know, we leave the concert, we leave the community, and it's this pure force of. I mean, it's possessed, right? I mean, he's fully possessed in the music, and I'm not sure I would agree with that description. I mean, I think it's consumed in the music, and it's the music as like a pure. I mean, maybe like I read too much Greil Marcus or something like that, but it's like a music as this like pure force of negativity. I mean, you know, it is not like we're not going to groove to it, we're not going to dance to it. It is just, you know, sheer like drive.
Yeah, it's really on purpose, huh? So but then after that's a gay, like a sort of game, you know, like after you have the credits, and then it becomes like this woman like and then, but it's really funny because how the public behaves, you know, towards in terms of installation when it's shown, you know, on big screen with a big sound. It's really hard to, you know, to maintain and to like, you know, it's not that long. It's maybe like 45 seconds, but it goes really high and it's really like some punk, you know, thing. And some people are actually leaving at that moment, which is not that.
Well, your music person, Vincent Meessen, is very. He did a lot of work with this traditional music and kind of a raw electric, kind of almost punk sound. But I didn't see the last scene as possession, because in the, you know, and even in this big city in Kinshasa, when people do spirit possession, they're never alone. You don't get possessed alone. You can't.
There's a lot of people.
No, we're into a film, right? And so I
so
think
it's a film, right?
You know, there's a cinematic issue there also, you know, and I think there's let's say an issue about thinking about the position of the artists versus, you know, as I said, let's say, the coming together. You know, like there's this sort of something that is trying to be said there.
Yeah.
So, of course, I can understand that, you know, being like a specialist of Congolese music, you'd say this is not what happens because we don't see the
But
people
that's
around.
kind of beside the point.
But yeah, because this
Yeah.
guy actually, when he performs in community, of course, he does the same. He's completely crazy. Like he's really a fantastic musician. But he does it, of course, with the family and with a lot of public there. But
And people
then it
interact with
becomes
him.
really some kind of possession.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Did you want to? I was going to ask you a question because Pierre brought this up in his introduction too, and I think it's kind of something. Maybe, I don't know if we've been, if we're avoiding this or not, but it just seems like there's a gender thing in the film and the importance of women and his relationship. I'm not really sure. I'm not. I mean, you didn't say it, but when we were talking before, you said that in the historical, you said that this is a male-dominated genre, and that's true. But it's also true that men are constantly writing songs in order to attract women. So it's kind of men who are trying to seduce women to the music, but women play a very, over time, a very limited role. The female agency is completely erased over time. And so there's this female orchestra. The last female orchestra in Kinshasa, we were trying to remember the name of it, but it was like 68 or something.
So
it used to exist. There used to be really important female singers and artists, and now they're not there anymore. So
I'm glad that you raised the issue, and because maybe Pierre, you will be able to meet this woman also. I've been working with when you will come back over there. I will give you the contact because it's a very specific phenomenon that happened. So I'm glad also that you mentioned Vincent Meessen because he's the producer of the sound and working with the women. And is this Belgian producer who's been a former punk musician, actually from the Belgian scene, who was passionate about Congolese music and who started to work there in the 80s and then went on to become the producer of many important bands like Konono and Steph Bendabilili, Zap Mama also, the first Zap Mama, as a very big specialist of also rumba from the early rumba since the 40s even, and been making some compilation. So when we discussed together, he said to me, I think that the interesting thing happening in Kinshasa at the moment is these 2 or 3 all women band that have been popping up.
Wow.
And I thought that was really like there was a political agency there because it's a milieu where if you're not a male, you're just a dancer or you're a chorist, but you can never accept a few stars, that from the history, we're talking about that, in the 80s and 70s, like 2 or 3 women became really like very respected musician. But all women band, the last one was in 68, so I thought it's like a sign that
so he was talking about 2 or 3 groups. Female groups starting in the 2000
just like
this is
14.
completely new. This is like news. This is breaking news.
Do you have their names?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool.
Because for 20 or 30 years, women have become dancers. In fact, one of my students finished recently a PhD thesis about this process, about how women have in Kinshasa in the music scene have become nothing but dancers.
Well,
so they're kind of in the public eye, but they're not.
I have something to say about that though. The women have always been dancers, even before, and some of them became singers.
But they were singers before they were dancers. So in the 40s and 50s, there was Lucia Yenga, there was female singers. In the 70s, they become dancers with Taboulé. And then they just become progressively more and more dancers, and they're not even singing in the 90s and 2000s. All of the artists try to get them to sing, and it just doesn't work. What happens is men, they encadrent. Les hommes font l'encadrement des femmes. And so Mbelolo it seems in the film that he's reproducing this encadrement des femmes. Now, I'm not being nice here, okay?
I didn't feel that way.
I felt it, but I just read a thesis
for me,
about it.
he's like more like, a sort of spectator to his own, his own past. And for me, when it's edited the way that it actually he's there and he's like arriving and it's just like this small shot when he's attending the concert scene. And for me, it was like this moment where he's like, somehow connecting with a past that he had lost, but in some ways completely, as you said, alienated from that scene also. So it's not about him being the the chef or whatever.
True, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So yeah, politically that was a very important decision also, like to really use a process of the work to empower, the
Well, and the narrator. Can you talk to us briefly about the narrator? The Oracle, yeah.
Oracle. She is originally a rapper, so she's from the rap scene in Kinshasa, and I really wanted to have a contribution from her, and in the end, she became this kind of, also I was really interested by the fact that her name, like what she is using as an artist name, is Oracle. Which is really strange also, and it's sort of so I started to discuss with her how we could kind of use it a little bit further, and like that she would become a sort of character in the film, announcing something that has been announced for a very long time. It's how we cope with this idea of the past, history, and in a more like Nietzschean or Benjamin kind of way of thinking, that you can rewrite that history from the present. So it's always something that needs to be rewritten within a context.
Did she write those words, or
no? This is something that I brought and discussed with her, but yeah, it's not.
What about that last part when she starts saying okay, Kao,
yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, what is that?
What is that? I didn't get that part.
Well, that's more the
Yeah.
cryptic. There you need it's more like the cryptic part. I imagine it as a poem, that is actually playing with of course it's sort of alliteration, and there is something behind also that a very well-known tune by OK Jazz. You have to remember that we are
On
into
entre, ok, on sort au chaos.
which is on entre ok, on sort KO. Which became a sort of motto for the band, and starting from there, I thought, okay, this is very interesting also because like OK is being like a sort of contraction of the order, and chaos being just like the contrary,
Chaos is also knockout.
Yeah, it's knockout, but
in the sense chaos.
but basically it's very interesting because when they started this song, it was not like that. It was on entre ok, on sort ok. The very first version from Franco was
Really?
but then he thought, yeah, let's change that, because it's like about his performance, you rentre ok, but then when you go out of the concert, you're completely knockout. So it started with that, and then there's like, this sort of, I'm not gonna enter into this concept of cosmos, but it's very interesting, more like Joyce's way of thinking about the relationship between law and order, and how creativity and how art can become a sort of, as Deleuze would say, organizing the chaos is more like giving shape to chaos. I think that's what we try to do as artists also.
Before we finish, I don't know if we're supposed to have time for questions from the audience, but I just wanted to kind of compliment you on the film. We didn't get to say how much we loved it, because it's a film about. It's not just kind of, there is nostalgia in it, but what I see you doing is more what social historians call memory work, kind of the work of memory and going back to things that we didn't know about ourselves and figuring out how we're
and not resolving the issue, like this. The film ends on this big X, that is on the facade of the club also. It's there. I haven't invented it, and probably there were some other letters, but they're disappeared. So it's just this kind of a. So it's not that's not trying to be conclusive about that story. It's trying to be. Trying to bring it back, and then of course like seeing the gap that is actually between that period, that kind of writing, and the situation, of now, which is dramatic, which is really dramatic.
I just wanted to also
it better than me.
thank you for making a film about Africa with buildings in it. The buildings in this film are fantastic, and you chose probably one of the top 3 most interesting buildings in the entire city. There's so many films about Africa that don't have buildings. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for coming.